Welcome to Media Mac. Dr. Shermak here. So happy to have you along the way. We are now into double-digit weeks for those of you on a semester schedule. That means we are in week 10. And this week really, I think, is kind of what I call an assembly week, where we're going to think about all the different media we have explored during the last 9 weeks and kind of bring them together under this umbrella that I'm calling this week the Internet Revolution, because at every turn we've discussed this semester, we've talked about the ways in which the internet has impacted that particular medium. That was our focus during that particular week. So this is something to think about. The internet in our lives right now, sitting in 2026, is ubiquitous, right? We cannot escape it. We're going to think about that today. We're going to think about the ways in which this influences the media we've discussed and try to bring that together and have some big takeaways today. So as we jump in, what I want you to think about, when was the last time you were truly offline? And that might even be a bit of a misleading question. I'll talk about that in a moment. But being offline, actually, this was not planned, quite obviously, but it ties in really well with this week's discussion. Yesterday at our home in Paso Robles, we were affected by a power outage. Some equipment down the street. It was only affecting about 57 customers, PG&E customers. We were included in that. And the power was out from about 3 a.m. until, I'd say, roughly 10 p.m., so like a good, maybe 16, 17 hours. And it was interesting because whatever equipment was down also affected our internet. So we had power outage and we had an internet outage yesterday as well. So it wasn't great timing. It never is, because I'm always working and I'm always using the internet to prepare classes and grade and all that good stuff. So I had to go to a coffee shop elsewhere and do my work. But it did give me a little bit of a time to be offline. I caught up a bit on some magazines, talked with my partner, which is always a good thing. We talk a lot anyway, but it was interesting though to have that forced upon me, right? It's not something in the midst of a semester like we are now that I would ever really choose. I just simply can't afford to go offline. And if you think about that in your own lives, maybe, obviously you're taking an online course, so, being online affects you directly, but think about it maybe for your job, just for your interests. The last time you truly went offline and how long that lasted. And I mean offline, like not checking anything, no scrolling, not watching a video. That's almost kind of an uncomfortable exploration, right? Because on one hand, we say, oh yeah, I don't go offline at all. And then on the other hand, it's also like, yeah, and can I even escape being online? Can I really truly be offline? For me, and for most of us in this class, we have iPhones, right? We are constantly online, even if we're not on Wi-Fi, right? It's picking us up through a cellular signal. I'll say this too. One of the reasons why I like being online is because I have major FOMO, and I have news FOMO. All right. If you're not familiar with the term FOMO is fear of missing out. And whenever I'm in a situation where I am cut off from the news, I don't feel comfortable. And yes, that could be, quote unquote, family news where I'm not able to get texts from my family. I live far away from my family, so that maybe adds to that a little bit. But I also just don't like being out of the loop. And these days, when news stories, develop at random times and seem to develop an awful lot, that really happens. And this uneasiness of feeling like you're always missing something can be very pervasive in your life. The interesting thing is that it's not new, right? It's not new, but I do think in the internet age, it has become extreme, right? So it becomes 24/7 in this age. And you can think to yourself when you look at your smartphone or scroll Instagram, be like, oh man, there's always something better that I could be doing, right? The University of Pennsylvania did a study on this. There's a link on our Going Deep page this week. They studied students who capped their use of Facebook, of Instagram, Snapchat, and they capped it at 10 minutes per day for 3 weeks. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, they're not going offline. They were on it for 10 minutes per day. The average American spends about 2 hours a day on their phone. 10 minutes is actually an extreme cap. What they found over the course of those 3 weeks, significant drops in anxiety and loneliness and depression. A quote from a participant says, I have here in my notes, quote, not comparing my life to the lives of others had a much stronger impact than I expected, end quote. I find that truly fascinating and kind of sad in a way, but I get it. I totally get it. And in thinking about, when I'm with people, am I really with people? Am I really there in the room? Or am I off scrolling away with something? If I pick up my phone, even like very innocently to be like, oh, let me look up this thing we're talking about, or, let me check my text messages really quick, or, oh, I got to find this email really fast. I tend to drift away very easily. Happens all the time. You're going to think about this a lot for this week's discussion, where you're taking what I'm calling a personal digital inventory. And in that inventory, it's not like what we did the first week. The first week was more of a mass comm inventory. This gets very specifically at the web and social media. And it's going to kind of allow you to reflect on your usage and share a little bit about your usage and have a discussion with your peers. So I'm looking forward to that discussion. As always, I'll be in there checking things out, dropping some discussions, giving you feedback on yours as well. Let's think about the internet, because I call this week the internet revolution, and I don't even think the word revolution is big enough to describe what has happened, all right? There's a number in your textbook that I think is fascinating, but I wanted to give you an update because this thing grows so quickly. We're moving into a new edition for the textbook starting in the fall, and an update is due because this moves so quickly. The textbook says that there are 4.5 billion with a B, people online as of 2020. All right. That number has been updated. A group called the International Telecommunication Union has it at 6 billion people as of 2025. Okay. To add context of that, that's 74% of the entire planet. Let's add more context. In the year 2000, all right, 361 million people were online. So from 2000 to 2025, the number of people online went from 361 million, which is a lot. That's like the United States, to 6 billion in a span of 25 years. That's a 1,500 and over 1,500% increase in 25 years. Let that sink in for a second. How many people are involved with it? The majority of the planet is on the internet. And you might be out there thinking, okay, Shermak, duh. It's the internet, man. Of course they're on the internet. Maybe this is the more shocking number. That's 74%. That means that there's still roughly 2 billion people who don't use the internet. 2 billion people who don't use the internet. And I'm right with you. I think about it, I'm like, well, how can that be? Right? How can that be? What's the deal with that? How do they operate? We're going to come back to that a little bit later in the episode, those who don't use it. Let's take a look back. We do this with every one of them, and you're going to get some of this history in your textbook. But I want to point out some things about the history with the internet because I think it's really, really important. The internet was not invented by a tech company. No tech bros involved here. It was not in Silicon Valley. It was not built out of some garage in Palo Alto. It was the United States Department of Defense. Let's go back to the Cold War era, 1960s. Military planners realized that they have a real situation. The problem is all communication in the United States networks are centralized. So the fear was always the Soviets, right? One Soviet bomb hits that hub and everything goes dark. Everything's wiped out. So they have this agency called ARPA, Advanced Research Projects Agency. And they get this idea to design what they call a distributed network. And the idea is creating a network where, let's say a node is hit, a node in that network is hit, the data, the communication, the information is just rerouted. And they based this at educational institutions, many of which are right here in our state of California. In 1969, what they call ARPANET goes live, and it links supercomputers at Stanford, just down the road at UC Santa Barbara, UC Berkeley, University of Utah. That's the foundation of the internet. I think what fascinates me, and one of the reasons I like talking about this, is like the most rigid, hierarchically controlled institution in America, our military, created one of the least controllable communication systems in the history of the world. There's some irony in there. And early on, when it was still ARPANET, people realized pretty fast that this was more about moving files. And early on, they started building things that today we call email or, boards or communities. They built them around shared interest. And those that were in early developed sort of an ethos, a way about this, where they said, we want this to be free. We want this to be open. We don't want it to be controlled from the top. A gentleman by the name John Perry Barlow. He was a poet, internet activist. He wrote a manifesto in 1996 basically saying this cyberspace should be independent, free of government control. And that has really been the central spirit of the internet almost since its birth. As the internet moved towards consumers, the quote-unquote average citizen, we had sort of the first iteration of it, right? The first 2 decades or so of the internet is where it's basically like a research tool, and it's mostly used in at universities that I mentioned, labs, certainly tech companies were there. And then this idea of the World Wide Web comes along and changes everything. The World Wide Web concept was not invented in America. A gentleman by the name of Tim Berners-Lee, he's working at a physics lab in Switzerland. In 1990, he invents HTML. And some of you may be familiar with it. If you're not familiar with it, I will tell you, you interact with it every week. The Canvas page, the Canvas pages that you see every week on our class, I build using HTML. And what HTML allows you to do, and maybe historically more importantly, what it allowed people like Tim Berners-Lee and many others to do, was link documents, link pages, build websites, create this World Wide Web. And it was rather simple as programming languages go. And Berners-Lee made it open. He didn't ask for any licensing fee, no permission. Anyone could use it. And that led to some of the first browsers. And if you are of a certain age, many of you in the class probably aren't, but it led some of the first browsers, Mosaic in 1993, The first browser I ever used was a Netscape that came around in 1994. And those browsers did something very important. They allowed, quote unquote, regular people, normies, to navigate the web. And to that point in time, there really wasn't a lot of commercial activity on the internet. And that changes dramatically in the mid-90s as these browsers are introduced. Once there's commercial opportunity, companies flood in. You have the dot-com era. A lot of that time was pure chaos. There was some obvious brilliance thrown in there. But what they call Web 1.0, the World Wide Web, is mostly a one-way street. You read it, you don't create it. Everything changes, though, in the early 2000s when Web 2.0 arrives. And the idea behind Web 2.0, and I think you'll see very quickly why this was such a huge change. Web 2.0 allowed the internet to be a participation sport. It allowed people to create their own content, participate in their own content. This is when things like blogs and YouTube and Wikipedia, and then of course social media came to be. We had user-generated content, and that allows the content to explode online. And I think that's really where this gets interesting specific to this class. Because it isn't just the internet competing with other media, as we've discussed throughout the semester. It's the internet absorbing them, taking over for them, becoming a part of their fabric. It is ebooks. It is streaming television. It is streaming audio and, replacing, if you will, radio. PDFs replacing handheld magazines. This is convergence, where you have a melding of communications, computers, electronics all together. And now you could go through one place, one network to get what was only delivered before in print or broadcast or audio or video. It's still absolutely wild, as a guy who has been around for a while and lived in a pre-internet age, that every medium we've covered in this class, you can get in your pocket. That's convergence. That quote-unquote phone isn't really used for much of a phone. There's this cool concept I've always been interested in called the 30-year rule. It was developed by an analyst named Paul Sappho, and he said it takes about 30 years for a new technology to be fully absorbed into a culture. And if you look back over history, it's wild how much this holds up. Radio was invented in the late 1890s, early 1900s. Golden age of radio is in the 1930s. Television is invented in the late 1920s. The golden age of television is in the 50s, early 60s. The internet smoked all that. Your phone smoked all that. Don't forget, television was supposed to kill radio. FM was supposed to kill AM. The internet was supposed to kill television. And none of these things really happened. All the technologies adapted. They find their lane. And as we've discussed throughout this course, they are still finding their lanes. Typically in these discussions, the alarm is much louder than the actual disruption. And as a quick aside, this is why I'm cautious about AI. Because I've studied and heard all these major technological claims and predictions before. AI is going to take all of your jobs. Don't forget, gang, AI is new. We are still very much figuring out AI. And most of the AI companies right now are in valuation stages. Money, please. They want people to think that they are the next absolute great thing. The investor's ticket to the beach house. They're going to make wild claims. They're going to make big claims. Maybe they'll come true. I'm not saying they won't. But we have more than enough historical insight to be very cautious of those big claims. And so many of those big claims being put out on social, right? Now it's interesting in this Web 2.0 age, the people behind those technologies have megaphones to project those. Be mindful of that. Okay, just a note of caution. And we are going to we've talked about AI in bits and different bits throughout this semester. We're going to continue to talk about AI, and we'll have more on AI as we move forward in the class. I'm sure I'll mention more about AI on this episode. Let's do this. Let's take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk a lot about your attention and who owns your attention, because we are in a battle for attention constantly, myself included. You're listening to Media Mac. I'm Dr. Shermak. We'll be right back after this.
Stay connected to your campus. The Questonian has been Cuesta College's trusted news source since 1966. From breaking news to campus life, we cover the stories that matter to you. Follow us at The Questonian on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, or visit questonian.com.
Welcome back to Media Mac. Thanks so much for joining us here on a Week 10 edition where we're talking about the internet revolution. And we spent the first segment really going over some of the history and development of the internet that I always think is really fascinating. And I think it's important to shift to talking about something that is genuinely important for you to understand this entire medium. I don't know what to call the internet as a medium. Is it a medium? I think it is, right? It's just so big and so disruptive that it feels like it needs another name or something, and I haven't landed on that yet, but that's my problem. The textbook has a really great line from this week's chapter, which is chapter 2. I know we're bouncing all over the place. We're going back to chapter 2. The quote I'm looking at from there that I think is interesting is they say, "No one actually owns the internet." Isn't that interesting? It's technically true. There's no single entity that can shut it off or kick everyone out or whatever. But of course, certain parts of it are extremely controlled. And the parts that are most controlled end up kind of controlling a lot of the internet. Let's think about this. Let's think about some numbers. So there really are 5 companies that have extraordinary dominance over what we do online. Okay, so we can't go any further without talking about Google. Google, as of right now, has about 89 to 90% of all global internet searches. All global internet searches run through Google. For the first time since 2015, that number has dipped below 90%. Interesting to note that. The cause of that dip? AI. Instead of going to a search page on Google, many people are asking questions in ChatGPT or Claude, or you pick your favorite. When you look at online retail, that of course is dominated by Amazon, right? And then you look at Meta, and Meta dominates social. So we have search, retail, and social, each of those areas are dominated by a company. And if you think about it, that's a big chunk of the internet, right? Don't forget, Meta is Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. Huge share. Apple, meanwhile, has a massive share of smartphones. And I have to admit, I am an Apple person. And I'm pretty hardcore about it. Meanwhile, Microsoft owns most desktop operating systems. So we have Microsoft, Apple, Meta, Amazon, Google. Those 5 companies dominating this space. 3 of those companies, Google, Meta, and Amazon, capture about 55% of all global advertising spending outside of China. Think about that. 55% of all global advertising spending, not online advertising spending, advertising spending outside of China. Yes, these are huge companies, but they're more than that. They are the infrastructure. They are the glue of the web. And their business models are built on something that your textbook refers to as surveillance capitalism. Surveillance capitalism. And I think it's really important to think about that, especially as a media consumer, and all of us are media consumers. You've probably had that experience where maybe you were talking to a partner or a friend or a relative about something. I don't know, let's say rubber duckies. And you were talking about rubber duckies on the couch one night, and then you went to bed and you got in bed and you did your usual pre-sleep doom scrolling. And your Instagram timeline is full of everything rubber ducky, from an actual rubber ducky you can play with in the bathtub to a rubber ducky hat and a rubber ducky pair of socks and a rubber ducky sweatshirt. And the latest edition of Rubber Ducky Weekly. Your phone's listening to you. I don't have my tinfoil hat on. This is not conspiracy hour. Your phone is listening to you. It's tracking everything you do. Every time you use Google, every time you use Instagram, every time you have your location on, you are generating data. One of my favorite data terms, digital exhaust. But exhaust almost doesn't treat that phenomenon correctly, because that exhaust isn't just vapor. It is tremendously valuable. And your data is your product. Your textbook has a line in there that I love. It says, "What oil was to the industrial age, data is to the information age." Google builds a profile on every one of us, right? Our age, our location, our income, our political leanings, the restaurants we look up, the hotels we search, the destinations we search. It looks at your search history, your Gmail, your maps, your YouTube, because Google owns YouTube. Any movement you do online, an algorithm gathers that and then auctions access to you to advertisers. And in that auction, the winning bidder will show up on your timeline, if you will, as a sponsored link. And if you click that link, the advertiser pays Google. Again, it's not a conspiracy. This is documented. This is how it works. This is Google's business model. And the goal is not just to show you ads. It is to keep you on the platform as long as humanly possible. Because more time on the platform means more data. And more data means they can target you better. And when they can target you better, that means more ad revenue. Your infinite doom scroll, the notifications you have set up, the like button, the comments, none of that is by accident. That is all intended to keep you there and gather more data. Again, this is factual, not conspiracy. I was thinking about this because just yesterday, I'm the advisor for the Questonian, our student newspaper at Cuesta, and I went to check to see if a student had posted material on Instagram as they had said they would, and they did. And looking for that one post, I caught myself probably about 15 minutes later scrolling through Instagram. And I was like, wait, what did I come here for? Oh, yeah, that thing I did 15 minutes ago. It gets me. I'm thinking about this all the time, and it gets me. It's so powerful, immensely powerful. As much as we are deeply entrenched in this and it is surrounded by us, there are people who are left out. There are people who don't participate. We talked about it. There are 2 billion people on this very planet that we're on who don't use the internet. A lot of that has to do with access. We've been talking about the internet, and we often talk about the internet as if everyone has equal access to it, and they simply do not. We don't see this problem enough in America. 95% of American adults say they use the internet. That sounds amazing. That's really incredible. 80% of those have home broadband, which is also pretty impressive. You dig into the numbers a little further, there's a gap that begins to open. For adults earning $100,000 or more a year, 95% have home broadband. Adults earning less than $30,000, that number drops to 57%. You go to rural households, and we have a lot of rural areas here in the Central Coast, 73% have broadband. When you get more suburban, that goes up to 86%. Don't forget, even though we talk about these things a lot, this isn't just about streaming Netflix or updating your fantasy football team. It's about telehealth appointments. If you live on the Central Coast, you know how difficult it is to get a friggin' health appointment around here. And you take what you can get. And a lot of times it's telehealth. Imagine not being able to access that because you don't have access to the internet. Whenever you apply for a job, go find our application online. I think the one area where this hits really hard is with children. Because talk to any educator, K through 12. My brother is a K through 12 educator, a principal. And he will tell you that the communication, the organization, the institution relies very heavily on web-based infrastructure to maintain and, I guess, operate children's places in school. COVID made our digital divide very visible. In a way, quite frankly, that I don't think anything else could. The whole world moved online, and there were millions of people who had no way to get there. There was a federal program. It was called the Affordable Connectivity Program, and it helped low-income households pay for broadband. This current iteration of Congress let it expire in June 2024. They did not renew it. They just let it die. The digital divide widens. Take this out globally, 94% of people in high-income countries are online. In low-income countries, that drops to about 23%. If you're wondering what the heck those 2 billion people out there are doing not online, I don't think it's because they're trying to live, off the grid and drink strange milks. They can't get there. it's probably not a choice. We do have a world where there is what the chapter calls, what I call, a digital divide between the information haves and the information have-nots. It's a big deal. Universal access to the internet is now a democratic ideal in a democratic country. And we're a long way from getting there. We're a long way from equal access, allowing this to be a true democracy. It's really, really something to think about, both on the American front and internationally. So, speaking of that, when we come back and we get into section 3 of today's podcast, we're going to talk about something called net neutrality. You may have heard of it. I want you to understand it. It's a big goal of mine in the class. Stay with us. This is Media Mac. I'm Dr. Shermak. We will be right back.
Want real journalism experience? Join the Questonian. Build your portfolio, develop professional skills, and tell the stories that matter to our campus. Enroll in JOUR 202 or 203 for 4 credits. Questions? Email thequestonian@questa.edu. The Questonian. Your story starts here.
Welcome back to Media Mac. Dr. Shermak here. It's week 10. We're talking internet revolution, hugely important topic that has a trickle-down effect over all the different mediums we have discussed throughout the semester. I want to close today in our final segment talking about something that I think is incredibly important. And I'll be really straight with you. I have a position on this. I have for quite some time, and I'll have it be heard. Of course, you can disagree with me. That's totally fine. And that's what college is all about, right? That is net neutrality. Net neutrality. You've probably heard this term. It's in your textbook. But I really want to make sure you understand what it is, all right? Despite all the complexity and the arguments over it, whatnot, it really comes down to a simple principle. Net neutrality is the idea that your internet provider carries all traffic equally, all right? So it doesn't matter if you're a huge company like Google or you're just a kid in San Luis Obispo posting a blog about skateboarding. There's no blocking, there's no throttling, there's no slowing down of certain traffic, there's no fast lanes where companies pay for priority. In that sense, it's pretty simple. The open internet we have right now, where, say, like a startup can compete with an established company, where anyone can post and reach an audience like I'm doing here, that exists because of this principle. Equal speeds. Equal access, no blocking, no throttling, those sort of things. One of the more interesting voices and one of the best voices on this entire issue actually has been John Oliver, the comedian. He hosts a show on HBO called Last Week Tonight. And he actually started way back in 2014 talking about net neutrality. He did another segment, I think, in 2017. But he did a good job introducing it and really getting to the bottom of it with the public. And one thing he said I think is still true to this day. He said the problem with net neutrality is that it's the most boring name for something that actually matters. And he wishes people would call it what it is. He used an F-bomb to say it, but basically preventing cable companies from screwing you over. He said it was something evil. And if you want to do something evil, you put it inside of something that's named for something really boring. And when he explained it to the audience, So many people had not understood it because it does have a boring name, that they crashed the FCC comment system. People were so upset about it. It took a comedian to explain this concept that broke a government's website. Kind of a remarkable moment in media. But besides the jokes, he showed some excellent data back in 2014 about the negotiations between Comcast and Netflix. As they were negotiating, the speed at which Netflix operated on Comcast networks dropped suddenly. The moment that Netflix agreed to pay Comcast, those speeds went back up to normal. John Oliver called it, quote, a mob shakedown. And I don't detect any lies there. This is the sort of thing that can happen in a world without net neutrality. But this idea as public policy has been a crazy, crazy roller coaster. 2015, then President Barack Obama, his FCC classified broadband as a telecommunications service, which is a big part of this. We'll get to that more in a moment. But they said it was a telecommunications service and the net neutrality rules were established. 2018, the first iteration of President Donald Trump comes in. His FCC repeals that on a straight party line vote. Republicans vote against net neutrality. Democrats vote for it. Republicans have the majority. Away it goes. 2024, then President Joe Biden, a Democrat, tries to bring those back. Trump comes back into office for Trump Part 2, January 2nd, 2025, I think before he was even inaugurated. A federal court, the Sixth Circuit Court, struck down the efforts by Biden to bring those back. And in that ruling, they said broadband was, quote, an information service, not a telecommunication service, meaning that the FCC never had any authority to regulate it anyway. Now, to be very honest with you, and here's my Jeremy Shermak hat, I don't know if I want this FCC regulating the internet anyway, but nonetheless, we've lost net neutrality. All this made possible by a 2024 Supreme Court decision called Loper-Wright. I hope I'm saying that right. This actually had a much broader reach, but included, the net neutrality thing was included in this. Basically what it said is that courts no longer have the right to defer to federal agencies on interpreting their own authority. So it's changed a lot how federal regulation works. That's a whole nother podcast in another area where I am not an expert. So let's come back to the communication stuff. July of 2025, FCC Chairman Brendan Carr will not be on my Christmas card list this year. He deletes the pretty much already dead rules for net neutrality from the FCC books. After he did that, he said on social media, quote, "Why not? I figured people couldn't die a second time." I'll let you draw your own conclusions about that. Something worth sitting with here. When net neutrality was first repealed in 2018, there were headlines that were saying it was the end of the internet as we know it. That hasn't happened yet. And I'm saying that as someone who is in favor of net neutrality. It hasn't happened visibly, really. There was an article on the website Tangle. I posted it in your Going Deep segment in the class. It really asked the question, did this catastrophe actually happen? And I think it's a great question. We should have that question. There was a quote from a professor from Stanford. Her name is Barbara Van Schweck. And she made a point to NPR about all this. That article is also on the web, on the Canvas page. She said, if you have a basic unlimited wireless plan from AT&T or Verizon or T-Mobile, they're already throttling your video from Netflix, YouTube, and TikTok, unless you pay for a more expensive plan. That's already happening. That is the net not being neutral. So this is taking place. And most people see that or experience that and just think, oh, that's just, I got a slow zone, or, I'm behind a brick wall or something. It's not working. No, that's not that's unneutral, non-neutral. The American Library Association says this is actually an intellectual freedom issue, where you have companies deciding what content to have at regular speed and what content to slow down. I don't think we want that. A tiered internet is not neutral when it comes to who gets information and who does not. That's not neutral. So I think the good news from my perspective, and again, this is my perspective, is that here in California, the good news is that after that 2018 appeal by Trump and his crew in Trump Part 1, California said, you know what? We don't need y'all. We're going to pass our own net neutrality law. And it pretty much replicates the rules that were in place before Trump repealed them in 2018. And it's still in effect to this day. So if you're listening in California and you're like, well, I haven't seen this, it's for good reason. It's law. Courts have said when the FCC has no authority, which is what that Supreme Court ruling was all about, states are entitled to step in and protect their residents. So that's what California did. Your ISP, your internet service provider in California, can't legally block or throttle or create fast lanes. Same thing is true in Washington State and Oregon. Big deal. A lot of advocates are looking for a permanent federal solution, but that would require Congress to act, and at this very moment, that seems incredibly unlikely. So keep an eye on this. It's a big deal. It matters. It matters to you if you're already, and I assume you're listening to this and you're in the class, you're already a internet subscriber. It applies to you. It applies to those who are not. It applies to everyone. As our democracy becomes more digitized, more networked, how we get the information on the web really, really matters. It's about delivery. It's about access. A lot to think about. So let me bring this all together as we start to move to a close. We started today talking about FOMO, fear of missing out, and some of the anxiety that's baked into being an internet user these days. We looked at the history, how this started as a military project and then became the most open communication system ever built in human history. We've talked about how there are a handful of companies who control enormous pieces of this system. We also talked about the crumbling rules that were designed to keep it open at the federal level. The internet is not inherently democratic. This is why it's so important for you to keep an eye on it. The internet amplifies what we bring to it, the organizing movements that we see, the spreading of disinformation, the connection of people, and the isolation of people. What matters so much is who really does control it. Even though no one owns it, who controls it and who has access to it? What are the rules that govern it? And these aren't technical questions. These aren't things where you have to have an IT degree to understand them. They are political questions. And again, I challenge you out there listening, if you're one of those who say, I'm not political, guess what? You are. You use the internet. If you use the internet, you're political. Get political. Because they go beyond just being political questions. They are political questions that are ultimately democracy questions. Being media literate, which is where I'm trying to get you in this class, isn't just about spotting disinformation or something that's AI. It's about understanding the structures behind everything you read and watch and scroll through every day. And that's a big part of what this class is all about. Speaking of class, what will you be doing this week? So your reading this week is chapter 2. As I mentioned, it's Media and Culture, the Internet and Digital Media. It's a little dense, but it's good. Read it carefully. A lot to learn there. I already mentioned your discussion for this week, personal digital inventory. You're going to actually count your screen time and give some thoughts on that. Initial posts due Thursday, reply and all work due Sunday. There's a quiz. There's the going deep reading list. That's optional if you want to dig deeper. And of course, there's the Ask Me Anything board to drop questions in there. As always, if you need anything else, please send me an email. All right, so thank you for being here. I hope this week makes you think a little bit differently about something you use every single day. That's kind of the goal, right? Because the internet feels like air, right? It's just everywhere. It's ubiquitous, right? Everywhere. You don't even think about it. You're online even when you're not technically doing something online. It was built by people who were making specific decisions in that era. And today, it is being run by people making specific decisions. There are some good decisions and there are some that are not so good. You need to pay attention to those. And that's part of what this is all about. As we wrap up, a reminder to take care of yourself and those around you. This has been Media Mac. I'm Dr. Shermak. We will see you next week. So long, everybody.